Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Thank you, Sean, for the invitation. I also extend my greetings to my former colleague, Christophe Roux. I listened very carefully what he said, very interesting. Now, I voted for the yes question. China oil demand is reaching plateau or peaking for a number of reasons. I will quote only three of them. First one is macroeconomic prospects weakening. This is not the only Xavier Chen's opinion. It's the central government's economic policy decision-making meeting on the 8th, 10th December last year. It recognized that the demand, domestic demand is weakening. Growth perspective is also weakening. And also there is a growing supply chain disruptions. So these three aspects combined together actually gives less, stronger growth, I would say, in the Chinese economy. China achieved 3.2% growth, the only large economy, positive growth in 2020. Last year, they achieved around 8% because the number is not published yet. So this year's government—
As high as 8%. I was thinking more like 6, but
yeah, well, many experts estimate that China achieved 8% last year.
Okay.
But the official number not published yet. For this year, 2022, they downgraded to 5%. But then also Goldman Sachs just published a new estimate. The Chinese demand this year would be 4.3. Another aspect of government policy is very interesting. If you watch China very carefully, the government now put more emphasis on stability and security, less focus on growth. In the past, when China has a problem of growth numbers, they just stimulus, put the stimulus packages. But now, where's money? Government does not have much money to stimulate economic growth yet. So more and more focus on stability and on security of employment, of actually domestic issues. Second, and then of course, part contributing to the weakened perspective is the deteriorating international environment that everybody knows.
What do you mean by that, deteriorating? Are you talking economically or the political relationships? Or?
Political relationship with the United States, and also these trade wars, between China and the US and also other countries. So this is the first reason that I'm less optimistic about the continuing oil demand.
I mean, we're seeing at the beginning of a year, usually there's many issues. This is probably the first year in 2 decades, maybe, that we start a year with China being an uncertain demand center. Its economic outlook is in the unpredictable box. And of course, it's pretty much shut off during the period of COVID because they've maintained a sort of COVID zero policy. From the point of view of the outlook for this year ahead and the management of COVID, how significant is that in terms of its impact on the economic growth of China? Just simply managing COVID, lockdowns, no tolerance.
Yeah, whether you agree or you do not agree, I really do not agree that this is the way to manage the COVID. But this COVID becomes a political issue. China wants to absolutely maintain this zero COVID policy to ensure 2 major events this year. One is the Winter Olympics in early February. And then second is the successful Party Congress in October. So before October this year, it's unlikely that China will become not normal as any other countries in the world. So this would mean that all the more and more restrictions, and today you have Xi'an, you have also Tianjin, maybe more cities will be locked down and restricting demand for oil in terms of all the transportation means. So this, I would say, is the second reason. Maybe you want to ask other questions related to my third reason, Sean.
Well, the question I was going to follow up on was there's the idea of that this is being managed, right? That the Chinese national government is managing this equation. Obviously, they're managing COVID, but they're also managing the economic slowdown. But it would appear over the early winter, at least, that they in some ways lost control, because we did see power shutdowns, blackouts, a real energy crisis in China. What was the cause of that? Was it because they lost control of this managed economy? What are the issues that emerged then that we still need to pay attention to in this year coming?
Well, China experienced last year widespread power shortages. So this is essentially due to shortage of coal. 80% of Chinese power is still generated from maybe not 80%, I would say 70% of power is from coal. And then there was excessive efforts to close down the coal mines. There is also a political issue with Australia that caused the disruption of Australia exports to China. So Australia volume dropped down. There is also a domestic power pricing issue that caps, the power price of coal-fired power plants where coal prices went up very high. So reduces the incentive of power generators to generate electricity. So these three reasons combined were actually causing a lot of power rationing and disruptions. So that would be really interesting, you ask what to watch. In energy transition sphere, I would say, watch what China is going to do. We just, in the name of—
on that point, which I was going to come to, Xavier, and please go ahead, but I just wanted to make the note that the Chinese president didn't show up to COP26 in Glasgow. There was a big question mark, and I think remains as we start this new year. Is China committed to the energy transition?
Well, President Xi Jinping did not go there, I think simply because he has announced everything that needs to be announced, has nothing new to announce. China is already in the implementation stage instead of talking stage, I would say. But then also during the implementation stage, they realized that there were a lot of problems as well, like power shortages, like excessive control of energy demand by provincial authorities. There was a race to reaching net zero by the provincial authorities. So they resort to dramatic measures to cut supply. So then what's really interesting, I invite audience to watch the Chinese communique of the last December central government's economic policymaking meeting. And it says we cannot win the climate change war within one battle. We have to pace the phase down of coal-fired power based on the availability and the reliability of alternative energies. So these are very powerful statements saying that, showing that China puts back the supply security ahead of decarbonization. And then also—
Go ahead.
Also, say from operational research perspective, I'm an engineer, so I have been doing the operational research in my research career. reducing CO2 is an objective function of an operational resource equation. But then this operational resource equation is subject to a number of constraints, these boundary conditions. And then in the past 1 year or 2 years, China tried, I think also other countries also tried to minimize the objective function, which is CO2 emission, but forgot the boundary conditions or constraints. So these constraints are energy supply security, continuing growth of economy, employment, financial security, all kinds of things that you name it.
Absolutely. I want to just make the note for everybody listening, about 200 people or something plugged in, that if you want to post a question to Xavier, please put it in the chat room now about the outlook for China in 2022. Xavier, on the point of some of the bigger challenges to growth, you have said that you think China's oil demand at around 14 million a day may be leveling off. I'm wondering how big a factor in that analysis is demographics. The fact that the country is a very older demographic, the population is starting to possibly shrink. What influence, although that's a big wheel of time, but I'm wondering from your analysis, what are those two things together, the impact of demographics and energy demand, and that we might be in a moment of change because of that as well?
I think demography affects oil demand in the long term. But my point, or my belief, that Chinese oil demand has reached a plateau or has peaked, is in 2020 or 2021, because we do not have the number of 2021 yet. I would say around the 15 million barrels a day, 14.5 or 15 million barrels a day. And I've already quoted the two reasons. One is, this deteriorating macroeconomic perspective, deteriorating international environment, and COVID control. But then also there is a substitution taking place, massive substitution taking place. In 2020, China sold 1.3 million EVs. Last year, 3.3 million EVs.
Electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles, yeah. So this trend of substitution will continue, reducing dramatically the road transport.
On a last question, given all of these issues, how should OPEC and OPEC Plus, if you were advising them, consider, we've lived with an OPEC strategy of the last decade or more, based principally on that China would be the destination for the incremental demand growth. Is that era over? Should OPEC adjust its basic strategy?
Well, that's, all what I said is my own opinion. Does not represent the Chinese NOC's
of course.
Government. Yeah. But I would say that we should revise the hypothesis that the Chinese demand will continue as it did in the past 10 years. It may have reached already a plateau. So, but that's on oil demand. Gas demand will continue. Last year, we do not have number yet, but the preliminary estimates, the Chinese gas demand reached around 12%. Growth is around 12%. And I believe that China still have room to double the gas demand in the next 20 years. So gas is a new focus, not only for domestic Chinese oil companies, but there will be also a new source of demand to OPEC countries and also to neighboring countries around China, like Turkmenistan, Russia, Myanmar.